AI and its advancement will make privacy constantly a bigger challenge to make sure that we secure our personal data and that of our children. But the temptation here is to override what makes our democracy work in light of how urgent this issue is. So that balancing act is. But then I would rather say, let's move a little slower and make sure we include everyone because we're such a diverse country, than lean more toward an Orwellian kind of world where we don't care what you think, we're just going to legislate just and get it over and done with. My worry is that this initiative could be a great way to produce more papers, speak at more conferences and the like. And if that little boy running barefoot in Soweto, if his life is not changed through the work we're doing on AI regulation in the next few years, then what the heck are we doing? We're just armchair philosophizing about this, you know.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of ITWeb TV. I'm joined today by Professor Johan Steyn, who is the founder for AIbusiness.net and a professor at Watson University in India. We're going to talk generally about AI and where it's probably going. Then we're going to specifically focus on the regulations globally and then drill down to what's happening more close to home. Johan, welcome and thanks for joining us here on ITWeb TV.
Adrian, good to see you and thanks for this opportunity.
No, it's good to have you. So let's start. AI has been around for a long time, but I think over the last couple of years, obviously ChatGPT really kind of accelerated, I guess, public consciousness around what AI is capable of. So we've now got this new phrase, generative AI, and that's obviously started to become more commonplace. People are using it all the time. But I think it's probably triggered this, perhaps kind of spearheaded an existing sort of AI arms race that's been going on. Where you've got companies and countries particularly kind of fighting it out for global supremacy. I think in some ways we're probably very similar with the hyperscale cloud, where we had Microsoft and Apple who've kind of reached $3 trillion market cap in the past few years. And I think those are the first companies to ever do that. From my research, it said that Apple jumped from $1 trillion in 2018 to $3 trillion in 2022. So they did it in 4 years. Microsoft took 5 years to do it. And then there's this new kid on the block, NVIDIA, who's obviously been around for 30 years, but and they kind of do GPUs and AI and kind of high-performance computing chips. And they've jumped from 1 trillion to 3 trillion in just a year. And I think that's largely off the back of the AI hype, if we want to call it that. And I think to kind of what's more interesting is that locally, SA has been in this battleground for cloud, as I see it. We've had the US players, we've had Google, Microsoft, AWS, and then we've had Huawei and Alibaba from China. And we're probably quite an unusual territory globally where we've got two different sides of the world competing for this kind of dominance. So obviously we'll see what happens with the US elections. I think that'll kind of throw a curveball into the whole thing. But how do you think the AI market's going to evolve globally? And I guess kind of aligned to international economies, but also the companies themselves and who are going to be the kind of more dominant players as you see it.
Adrian, look, I think we are in a post-ChatGPT world, I call it. In the past, my experience with at conferences, training, and with clients is that there was a lot of misconceptions about what the technology is, but also a lot of fear. I think mostly because of Hollywood and movies.
I'm sure.
Now the spectrum has changed, and look, luckily the whole AI conversation is really more front and center, which is good. It's not, I think at one stage it was really just secluded within the technologist's realm. Now pretty much everyone I know is speaking about it, my father even, and others. But now it's moved to, it's the best thing since sliced bread. We don't have to fear it anymore. We can essentially AI everything in our business and we'll fix our culture problems, our leadership problems, clients understanding, etc. So, and it's always more dangerous for me, this over enthusiasm about AI. But it's in the news. It's important. It is happening more than ever. It is going to change our lives. I think it's difficult to even imagine what the next 5 years would look like. You know, I read somewhere that large language models will be about 1,000 times more powerful in only 3 years from now. And what will that mean for education, for business, and the like? But you are right. I think South Africa and Africa is in a very peculiar space because we kind of in the middle between the West and the East. And for many years now, we have seen what we can call digital colonization. In other words, a foreign country would want your government and your industry to use all of their equipment, whether it's Cisco, whether it's Huawei, or whatever the case is. There's obviously a market share chase for business. But I also think there's a power struggle around national security, about the harvesting of data, national security data and the like. And I'm always advocating as far as possible that we create African solutions for Africa by Africans. And I'm not saying we should discard the global players, the hyperscalers with cloud, these equipment manufacturers. Let's use it, but let's use it carefully. And my concern is that, in South Africa, we use a lot of the equipment from the East. And if we're ever in a war or a very serious trade dispute, and they decide to switch it off, if we think of our water infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, and others are running on these foreign equipment units, that could be quite a big problem.
Yeah.
I also think Africa is probably one of the few, what I would say, unsaturated markets from a technological point of view, on youngest demography, fastest growing population, economies that are really growing when we have some problems. But I think it's like a gold rush for technological prominence. What it will do to us and our children's future from security, from a privacy point of view, etc., is where we need a lot more conversations and actions on, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think we can touch on that later. I mean, we'll talk about the regulations and the need for privacy and, how we kind of manage this whole situation. I think one interesting part of it is perhaps around the kind of this coming wave. So we're not even through the AI hype, and already the next wave of hype around the technology is kind of coming, and that is quantum computing. So I don't want to go into the physics and the mechanics of it, because it's going to blow my mind to just try and think about it, not even talk about it. So how do you see quantum computing changing the game for AI? We've heard that it was kind of 5 years off. I think that was, 5 years ago, I heard it was like 10 to 15 years off. Now, I think I'm hearing that it's maybe 2 to 3 years away. So AI kind of suddenly seemed to snowball and there was a catalyst for its kind of growth. I think that's going to happen similarly with quantum. What's your kind of take on what you think quantum will do for AI?
Yeah. Look, as powerful as AI is, it's still limited by the compute power, which is limited. Quantum computing, and it's complex. I think you need to be a scientist to really understand it. But the basics of how I get it is, most computers as we know it are silicon-based. It works with ones and zeros. But quantum computing takes it to a whole new level. The way I kind of explain it is, if you draw a kind of a square, and there's a 1 and a 0 respectively on each square, but you then make it a 3D image, and there are even more ones and zeros, and then you can rotate it. That's in a way what quantum technology or quantum computing can do. It's very, very expensive. It also needs very specific temperatures to run in. I think minus 400 Fahrenheit, if I'm not mistaken. So to democratize it will be a challenge. I think at this stage, probably Google, maybe the United States Army, or the Pentagon, and maybe China and a few others will have it. But like with all technology, it will become cheaper and it will become more available. The potential benefits from an environmental point of view is really great, because we are producing a lot of damage to our environment with these large data centers at the moment and in the future. The potential for a lot more security, also finding answers to healthcare problems and societal problems is amazing. But the kind of the dark side of it for me is that this is so powerful that currently, as far as I understand it, none of our security systems, whether it's national security, bank security, etc., can withstand a split-second attack by a quantum computer.
Yeah.
It seems like it will become part of our daily lives over the next few years. I think a lot of governments are probably investing and looking into it, universities as well. But will our children live in a world where they speak about quantum computing like we are now speaking about Google search?
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. But the dangers will be immense, and it will really leapfrog AI even more than it has done up until now, because of this immense computing power suddenly at our disposal.
Yeah. I think it's frightening. And I guess we'll have you back in a couple of years to talk about what we need to regulate with quantum. But yeah, I mean, you touched on one point there that I'd like to kind of go back to, and that's about the kind of the environmental impact of AI. I know that with data centers, I think there's a statistic that Google said that its search with AI uses 10 times more power and kind of CPU computing power than a typical search. So obviously that's 10 times more cost, but it's 10 times more power, 10 times more electricity, 10 times more cooling. There's a whole kind of environmental impact that's often associated, or probably not often associated with AI, but kind of exists there. So what's your take on that, given that I guess the likes of Google, the likes of Microsoft, AWS are striving to become these kind of carbon zero companies, and yet now they've kind of suddenly got to deal with this massive growth in terms of the carbon that they're putting out because of AI.
Yeah, we know electronics produce heat. Our cell phones do it. Our laptops do it. That's why there's a fan in the laptop and makes the noise that irritates us. But now think of hundreds of thousands of computers in a server room or a container, and especially the kind of number crunching it needs to do in a generative AI era. The heat, the water usage is immense. An example, if I remember correctly, when OpenAI released ChatGPT, up until that time, just to train the model, they consumed 1,278 kilowatts of hours of power, and I think it was something like 550 tons of carbon.
Wow.
That's before releasing it. Now imagine what's happened since over the last 18, 24 months. So it is a huge concern. It's not talked about enough. And you are right, these organizations are aiming for net zero. How they're going to get it right with where we are now, I don't know. But if we are serious about the future of our children and our environment, we have to talk about it. You know, we're the only species on Earth that kill each other in mass when it comes to genocide, and that actively destroys the environment we're living in. Now it's getting even worse. So hopefully with the advance of technology and with quantum computing and other things, other maybe kind of material that will be produced, we can bring the carbon footprint and the need for cooling and water down. But back to the arms race, it'll probably just increase. What we will do to our environment in the next quarter century or so will probably not be very good for us and for our future.
Yeah. So let's talk about AI and the law and regulation. I think there's a lot of kind of things with these new technologies. They often tend to run ahead of the laws. The lawmakers typically take a while to kind of catch up. Maybe 5 to 10 years we'll kind of start to see legislation. We saw it with Uber that they're still kind of, they introduced the technology and there was a big kind of initial kind of clash between the taxi drivers and the Uber drivers. And I mean, I'm still not sure if there's legislation kind of understanding how Uber impacts our society, whether there's places for Uber drivers to rest and all those kind of things. But anyway, so let's talk about AI and the law. The content risks of generative AI. I mean, we've seen deepfakes. There was a whole kind of Taylor Swift and adult videos, which kind of caused a big stir. I mean, I think anything Taylor Swift does tends to cause a big stir. We've also seen security issues. There was the case with, I think it's Arup, the engineering company in Hong Kong, where they, a financial manager or CFO gave up $25 million to basically the kind of social engineered through deepfakes on a call. The film industry has been using AI for a while, we know in the kind of background, but then we've had the recent strikes in Hollywood where they're kind of worried that their images and their voice are then going to be used later on without their kind of consent. So, I mean, there's definitely controversy there. So what's your take on the kind of the content risks around generative AI?
Yeah, if I can just maybe start, Adrian, by saying you're right. Regulation follows innovation. You know, when we started driving cars and people got killed because there was nothing that would hold them back in a crash, we had seatbelts introduced. The challenge we have now is that the rate of change is so fast that for regulation and regulators to keep up is, I think, almost impossible. What is the end goal of regulation is to protect business, but also to protect the citizens of a country. And that balance between regulation and innovation is, do we over-regulate this technology? Again, in a commercial and potentially military arms race, I don't think any country will hold back. They will just go all the way with this.
Yeah.
But then what's the effect on people, on actors, so it's a great example. My image, my voice, my likeness is my property, essentially. But do I sign that away for the rest of my life without being paid fairly for it? And I think that's basically what the Hollywood strike's about. By the way, in our country, we have got nothing when it comes to regulatory protection on artists and art as far as it goes to deepfakes. Deepfakes is interesting because, a few years ago, we saw a lot of deepfake videos. There was that famous one of Will Smith stuffing food into his mouth. But it was so clearly a deepfake. The pixelation around the head, the shades on the face, the shape of the face. These days, the videos that I've seen, it's indistinguishable from the source material. And I've constantly see on my YouTube feed adverts where Elon Musk promises, or even our South African newsreaders, and it's so well done.
Yeah.
By the way, the biggest use of, or misuse, if you would, of deepfakes is in the pornography industry.
Okay.
A big scourge that's happening in the US at the moment is that they would take these thousands of pictures that young people put on social media, but pictures of young girls, they will make pornographic images or videos from it, and then they would essentially hold the parents
use it
ransom for it. Yes. Yeah. Now, God forbid, imagine that happens to your child or to you as a parent. What about case law? If we go to court and you submit evidence where I clearly threatened you with a voice call or a video call, there's no way for me to disprove at this stage that wasn't me. I also don't think there's any technology that can very accurately pick up that this is a fake video.
Yeah.
It'll play a huge role into our futures. Currently we in a year where more than 1 billion people will participate in national elections. The US one will be interesting from a potential deepfake point of view as well. So we have to regulate it. How we regulate it and how we enforce the regulation, I think, is the real challenge. For instance, on YouTube these days, if you upload a video, there's an extra section where you have to say whether this is self-created or by an AI. But essentially, if I lie in that question, who's going to know it?
Yeah.
But what damage will it do to us from a reputation point of view and to our children? Again, we know that cyberbullying is becoming more and more of a real big issue in our schools across the world. And these deepfake tools, I've played around with some of them. A lot of them are free, and I played around with it the other day where I put Elon Musk's face on my face in a video interview like this. It was pretty easy. I think it took me about 10 minutes. It mimicked my voice, my lip movement, the face. It's so easy. We have to look at regulation, Adrian, but how do we enforce it? And I think even if we look in our country with POPIA, for instance, at the moment, great legislation, but the enforceability, the court cases, the costs in, calling to task those who have violated it takes so long. If we can't even get that right, what are we going to do with AI in our jurisdiction and across the world?
Yeah, I think the YouTube point is kind of a good one. I want to kind of follow up on that. I think when we kind of talk around websites, there's the idea that you have human readers, so you and me, but then you also have machine readers. So the search engines which kind of go through, and the websites need to be clear for the machine readers so that they can kind of rank them more highly or kind of categorize them. But I think there's also this kind of interesting idea that, I guess it's the snake eating its tail, where AIs will start to kind of build content based on what it's reading on the internet, and then start to publish content and then start to consume the content. And it kind of becomes like this vicious circle. What do you think we can do about that? How do we stop this kind of, this snake eating its tail with machine-generated content just consuming and producing and consuming and producing?
Look, I think the owners of these large language model data sets, in my view, it starts with them. Look, I think at some stage we're going to probably use up all the original data and documents and videos that's out there on the internet, although we are producing it at a massive rate as well. The question is AI becoming dumber because of this, because of the data that it's learning from? I often think, if I would, my 10-year-old, if I would lock him up in the house and say, learn by yourself how to cook food, how to protect yourself, how to clean yourself, or maybe a better example is when he was 3 or 4. So learn by yourself without learning from an adult. It'll be a disaster. It'll probably cause his death. And it's maybe an extreme example, but are we doing the same now? And especially with fake kind of data, whether it is intentionally fake or misinterpreted kind of data, it'll play, I think, a huge role when it comes to current biases when it comes to gender, ethnicity across the world, geographical biases. We will probably just, even though there are a lot of efforts to minimize these biases, but it'll probably increase it even more. We saw it when Google started playing with or releasing the text-to-image. It was the opposite of OpenAI. OpenAI, if you asked it to draw me a picture of leaders, it will probably be Caucasian males. And then the Google example was the Nazi soldiers, and they were all smiley, friendly, African-looking people. I think it's a problem. And businesses as well. Businesses are using more and more kind of ring-fenced internal large language models, great business benefits to generate content on chatbots and call centers and the like. But if they don't constantly work on refreshing that data, making sure that it's accurate, the same will happen internally when it comes to how they use that data. So the large language model owners are probably the ones responsible more than any to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Yeah. One aspect that we haven't touched on, or we may be kind of skirted around, is the copyright issues. Again, that was one of those kind of initial problems that we faced, or that has kind of cropped up. And I think we've seen in the US news organizations are kind of suing OpenAI and Microsoft around their kind of use of their copyright material by these large language models, which are consuming it and then essentially kind of reinterpreting it or regurgitating it in a different way. And who owns the copyright, who has access to it. So what's your take on that? How do we solve those kind of things? Should OpenAI essentially be kind of getting permission from everyone that it's going to source from? Is Google, Google has built its reputation from crawling the internet and being able to kind of deliver it to us. So it's always had that capability. But I guess the AI aspect kind of throws a new kind of spin on that. What's your take?
Yeah, this is very, very tricky, and it's often in the news. Look, the end goal of copyright, in my view, is to make sure that my IP is protected. But why do you want my IP protected? There's a monetary aspect to it. I've studied for many years, or I'm experienced. So what I give my clients, for instance, or when I write, should be mine so that I can earn a living from it and the like, or a business can do it as well. So I think it's more than anything a money issue. Probably also trade secrets, which again comes back to money, maybe even national security. But yeah, look, I don't honestly have a stance on it, Adrian. Maybe I haven't thought about it enough, although I have quite a bit.
Yeah.
But anything I write at the moment is something that I've learned somewhere. Obviously, I've interpreted, I've used my experience, my own lens on it, but there's probably nothing I can write that is 100% new. It's like I'm discovering a new medicine or something. So, but then to what do I owe those who I can't even remember, those hundreds of thousands of people who have influenced my life, whose books I've read, etc. So I don't know how we can control it. Even plagiarism checkers are not keeping up with this. You get tools now that will really naturalize your language that a ChatGPT, for instance, produces. You get platforms that scramble the text and so forth. It's so easy to actually write great content, for instance, movie scripts and the like, that is undetectable. This is also a question from a university and education point of view. And some of the universities I work with seem to go back to oral examinations, which is impractical and difficult.
Yeah.
But you've given me this great submission, this white paper. Put the paper down and come explain to me your thinking. That's a quick way to catch out whether somebody's been ChatGPTing it.
Yeah.
But who owns the copyright, and how do we detect it? How do we enforce it? I don't know. And at this stage, there's a lot of talk about it. I don't know if anyone really has that answer.
No, it's a challenge. And I suppose, as you say, if you knew the answer, then you wouldn't be sitting here with us. You'd be living like Elon Musk, I'm sure. Okay, so obviously the regulation around AI has got more implications than kind of copyright and deepfakes. So let's go into that a bit more. Let's look at it kind of locally. You've mentioned POPIA. But can you give us an overview of the current state of AI regulations locally, or perhaps globally first and then locally? What do you see are the common trends, and how does South Africa's kind of approach to AI compare to those of other countries?
There's a lot happening, especially in the so-called global north, so Northern America and Europe, Asia, even Middle East and so forth, where countries are busy, I would say, finalizing their stance on this, looking at legislating it, trying to enforce it. Maybe the best example for me is the EU AI Act, which is still not, unless I'm mistaken, enacted into law. I think the member states have accepted it. There are a lot of principles in that proposed legislation that I think a lot of regions will probably follow. Hopefully we in South Africa as well, but we have to flavor it from an African and our own society point of view. One of the things that I like about the AI Act, there's a number of really great pillars, but the one that I really favor is what we call explainable AI. Most of even in South Africa, our banks, our telcos, our insurance companies are using, to one extent or another, decisioning systems, automated decisioning systems. I apply for a loan. And these systems are often highly accurate, very fast. It takes all of my data. It can probably do it a lot better than a human assessing my financial state, for instance. But algorithms make mistakes. We build biases into it, and we program it incorrectly. And the one thing about the AI Act that I like is that I, as a consumer, have the right to ask you as my bank, how did you get to that decision? Now, I don't know if the banks will even know how to explain it.
Yeah.
But if you think we have large call centers at the moment, can you imagine if anyone who is a consumer can ask their provider, how did you get to that decision? But it is also there to protect us, because it might be that the decision was made because of ethnicity, gender, etc., which we cannot downplay what a big role those traditional biases are still playing in these data sets. South Africa is, like all regions, a bit unique because of our own kind of social construct, our 3,000 languages and dialects, our history, even from a colonial history point of view, and some of the issues we're still dealing with today in our country and elsewhere. So my view is that we should take all the best we can from these different frameworks. Let's not reinvent the wheel, but we can't just copy and paste it. It must apply to us and to our citizens. In Africa, there are a lot of countries are kind of starting out on this journey. Countries like Mauritius, which I guess we can consider part of Greater Africa, Kenya and others have progressed a lot more, from my experience or what I've been reading, than South Africa. But there's a lot happening here as well.
And we had that national AI discussion document,
yes.
And I think that was kind of produced late last year, but kind of really released earlier this year. So what's your take on that? Are we we've got some existing regulations, but maybe you can kind of explain how those kind of fit together. But this kind of national AI plan discussion document, is it really, the clue's in the name, it's a discussion document. It's not meant to be a final kind of draft of something. But what's your take on where we are as a country on kind of dealing with regulating AI?
Yeah, there are a lot of things happening, so it's good. I don't want to be overcritical about it, because we have to start somewhere. We can argue, are we already too late? Do we have to move faster? At least there are things happening. In October 2020, we had the Presidential Commission on the 4IR, and the recommendations were incredibly good. It was such a great document. 3 years later, we have the draft National AI Plan. In the meanwhile, we had ChatGPT, Gemini, and who knows, possibly quantum computing soon, or who knows. So I think it's difficult for governments across the world, including ours, to move quickly enough, but to do it right, because you can't just have a knee-jerk reaction. You need a wide spectrum of society involved. Otherwise, because if we're a dictator, you can probably have an AI Act tomorrow.
Yeah.
This is how it's going to work, and sorry, Orwell and everyone else who warned us. So that draft document was a good start. It was very vague. One of my worries is that we need the three, I call it the AI tripartite agreement that we need. We obviously government and governmental agencies, academia and research institutions and our universities absolutely needs to be involved, but then industry as well. And that will include your larger global firms who are working here, but also we've got a lot of great AI and data expertise in our country. They all need to work together. My concern is, and if I look at that document, Adrian, that it's overly leaning toward academia. And I'm not saying this is just a blanket statement for all in academia and all universities. My worry is that this initiative could be a great way to produce more papers, speak at more conferences and the like. And if that little boy running barefoot in Soweto, if his life is not changed through the work we're doing on AI regulation in the next few years, then what the heck are we doing? We're just armchair philosophizing about this, Currently, then in April, we had the event at Johannesburg Business School, where the then minister spoke. He spoke exceptionally well. To be honest with you, I thought, this is going to be another political, boring speech, but he was very informed, very well spoken. Met some people that I know in the industry there, and now we are in there's a working group established by the CSIR and others. I'm part of that. It's also moving a bit slow, but I guess it's how these things work.
Sure.
It's moving slow because they're really trying to bring in as many people from wide backgrounds, technically, experience, ethnically, etc., which is great. But how big must that bubble be before it really starts moving forward? I'm part of it, and I'm not critical of it. I think it's great. I just don't want 3 more years to go by before we really see something happening.
Sure. Yeah. I suppose that's one of the things with the 4IR Commission. I mean, I think we've been 5 years since that first came out, and I know we've had the AI Institute that's kind of been founded since then. That was one of the recommendations, but I'm not sure how many of the other kind of recommendations have been kind of fully worked on.
Yeah, there were 8 recommendations, as far as I remember. The one was AI Institute, so that's happened. How efficient it is and how much progress, I'm not sure. The other one was National AI Strategy. We're now finally getting there, but the others are... It's possible that there's a lot happening and we just don't know about it.
Sure.
But I am critical around that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was one of the things with COVID, was that kind of wake-up call of how quickly government can move if it needs to. But typically, as you say, I mean, you understand the reasons. They have to kind of gauge opinions from everyone, and then you have to kind of go through and sieve through them, and then you have to try and take it back to them. And it's a whole kind of feedback process. Maybe AI would speed that up.
I know. Look, AI is important. Let's not, because the temptation here is to override what makes our democracy work in light of how urgent this issue is. So that balancing act is. But then I would rather say, let's move a little slower and make sure we include everyone, because we're such a diverse country, than lean more toward an Orwellian kind of world where we don't care what you think, we're just going to legislate just and get it over and done with.
How do you think the South African government is kind of engaging? I mean, we've talked about it there, but how is the government engaging with the private sector? I mean, you used to be a consultant, I believe, probably are still a consultant, but in one of the big audit firms, I think. But how have you seen business? I mean, business is obviously running ahead and adopting it where it can. That said, I think there is some caution. But how do you think government is engaging with business in this kind of AI topic?
I've seen actually quite a lot of engagement with universities. Tshwane University of Technology, Johannesburg University, and probably many more. I know at Stellenbosch, they've been doing some amazing work from a computational thinking point of view. I think there are a lot of conversations happening, a lot of collaboration. Most of it, even though I work in the field, honestly, Adrian, I'm not really aware of. I hear the rumblings. Organizations like the CSIR are doing amazing work. Can we do it better? Probably. Can we use the expertise in our country? And if we have to rely on certain expertise and innovation from the Microsofts and the Amazons of the world, absolutely. So I think there's quite a bit happening. I don't know if maybe government or organizations like the CSIR and others can do more to make sure that we in the public see that stuff's happening. There are exciting things happening. I don't see a lot of press about the good things that's happening. There surely must be a lot. Could there be more? Absolutely. But I don't think it's an absolute dire state of no collaboration.
So one of the aspects, and one of the kind of you touched on it earlier, is the kind of the POPIA, the kind of this excellent legislation that we've got, and then the reality is that the kind of the investment put in, and obviously our budget is only a kind of finite amount, a national budget. But I think the Office of the Information Regulator, their task is growing continually. I think it's doubled year on year. I think that's the kind of rate that it tends to go in terms of the caseload that they kind of get in reports. And yet their staff haven't doubled, their kind of skills haven't doubled, their resources haven't doubled. So what's your kind of take on how we're addressing kind of data privacy and security around AI?
AI and its advancement will make privacy constantly a bigger challenge to make sure that we secure our personal data and that of our children. The amount of data that we are putting out there through the platforms we consume. And remember, we always say to people, nothing is free. Your email provider, your cloud email provider, your maps provider, etc. You are paying with your data.
You're the product.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully they will remain to be, if they still are, the good guys, so to speak. But what happens, if that data falls into the wrong hands or used in the wrong way? There's certain things about me and my life that no one should know about. Whether that is my fantasies, my deepest fears, the way I raise my child, and so forth. And imagine the kind of manipulation and just what you can cause in society and in certain individuals, organizations, if that data is used, it's modeled. We understand so much more of you. And modeling, as far as I remember, Adrian, even Popea talks about the fact that you can't use private information without consent, of course, but to model what kind of consumer that is. Now, we know if I use all the data I have on you as a bank, for instance, I probably can give you so much better service because I can anticipate your birthday. I can see you start spending money on nappies and on milk, so you probably have a new baby in the family and so forth. But I also think we give consent so quickly because I don't know about you, like when I have an Apple upgrade, do you actually scroll through all of that before you say yes? No, it's too much to read.
I even accept all the cookies on all these sites.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's easier.
Yeah, and it irritates me. So I just click away. What am I giving up? And does it matter? Because, the other argument is I'm a law-abiding citizen. I don't care if my face is recognized, if there's facial recognition everywhere, if all my banking habits and my porn habits or whatever, if these companies know about it. It's okay to argue that until it's being used against you or your children or by a commercial competitor that actually uses that data to, and we spoke about it earlier, I think you gave the example of generative AI being used to mimic the voice or the writing style of a CEO giving instructions to his or her employees. So privacy will become more and more a big problem as the AI's capability to generate information, but also to use our information at scale grows.
So recently there was an article in The Observer featuring Ray Kurzweil, who's a well-known computer scientist, kind of AI visionary at Google. And one of the things that he said, I just want to kind of run it by you, if I can find the quote. Here we go. Asked what should we be doing now to best prepare for the future, he said, it's not going to be us versus AI. AI is going to be inside ourselves. It will allow us to create new things that weren't feasible before. It'll be a pretty fantastic future. What's your take on his kind of perception there, his take on where AI and the human race is going?
Look, I have great respect for him. I mean, The Singularity is Near was produced, 30 or so years ago, that book. He's about to, if he hasn't already produced or published his latest book, The Singularity is Nearer, and I can't wait to get my hands on it, or my digital hands on it. In this discourse, there's often two extremes, and it's a utopian and dystopian kind of an extreme. There's a kind of a post-human view on this, or what different words that people use. But essentially the one view is it'll make life so much better for us. Social equality, healthcare, longevity, etc. And the technology absolutely has the potential to cause that. But the other side of the sword, again, AI being a neutral tool, like all the tools we create, is the more dystopian, Orwellian total lack of privacy, total state control, and so forth point of view. And I also think we need to look at the place from which somebody and it's valid what he's saying. But if implants in my brain, for instance, can make me smarter, implants in my body, AI implants can make me stronger and healthier, great. But what about the billions of people who will never afford it, ever have access to it?
Yeah.
And I think and Yuval Noah Harari writes about this, and I think in Sapiens, where he says we might produce what he calls the useless class. So there will be a subsection of our population that will become even richer, more powerful, live longer, be much smarter, and all the rest of us will be potentially out-automated, not go to university, and essentially will de-evolve.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we should look at both. You can't just have a dystopian or just a utopian view. We need to find that balance. I don't think he's wrong. But again, that little kid running in the streets of Soweto, how will their brain implant impact him or her? So we need to also back to our lens as South African lens on these kind of statements.
Yeah. I mean, I think something that was discussed a few years ago, and I think it's it kind of went back down under the surface, but it seems to be bubbling up a little bit more. And I think during COVID, there was the kind of the COVID grant was kind of seen as a precursor to this. But this idea of universal basic income, where essentially the people who are doing jobs that are automated or out-automated, how do we replace them, or how do we give them this basic income? So what's your take on that? Where do you see us as a country going towards that? And perhaps globally, I mean, is a universal basic income even possible?
We have to address it because, again, more and more jobs will be out-automated, and people have different views. You know, the often a counter argument I hear is in every industrial revolution, at the end, there was a net positive effect on the amount of jobs that were created, which is true for the previous industrial revolutions. But now it's changing so quickly, advancing so quickly, and it's no longer I'm a horse cart rider, now I'm a locomotive operator. It's essentially, if you're not a coder or in some sort of kind of call it intellectual space, you will probably not be employed, and even then you will probably be out-automated. What do we then do with people? Now, I think universal basic income is a great idea. I have no idea how we're going to pay for it. Who's going to pay for it? Well, especially in our country, but even globally. It is a conundrum, because what do we do if, say, our jobless rate at the moment doubles because of AI?
As it is. Yeah.
Something I thought about is, and it won't make any sense, it's probably laughable, but like, for instance, BEE legislation. What if we have automation legislation? In other words, you can only lose 10% of your workforce at maximum because of technology. But then organizations have shareholders, they have numbers to hit, they have global competitors. So it's probably laughably unpractical, but we need to think of wacko ideas maybe to sort this out.
Yeah. I suppose it's going to be the brave government minister that puts that forward to say it's okay to lose 10% of your workforce, as we say, when our unemployment rates are so high as they stand. Johan, just before we go, is there anything that you want to add, any kind of closing thoughts that we haven't covered?
Look, it's been a great conversation, Adrian. Thank you. I always say I do what I do because I'm a father, not because I'm a person working in AI. I see the potential for my kid, but I also see the potential dangers. Let's not be asleep at the wheel. And irrespective of your level of knowledge or influence when it comes to technology, we as parents and co-workers and colleagues and fellow countrymen and women should be talking about this and grappling with it.
Johan, that's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Please remember to stay tuned, like, subscribe, and share our videos on ITWeb TV.